everybody. So thank you for joining us today for our Hidden Peace Builders panel. Our panel includes Madeline, Brandon, Ali, Rebaz, and myself, Chantal. Maybe I will invite my fellow panelists to put on their screens to say hello. Awesome. So we are Masters of Peace and Conflict Studies students at Conrad Grebel University College at the University of Waterloo. We joined the program from a variety of different disciplines, including the humanities, law, science, technology, just to name a few. And what unites us is our passion to understand sources of conflict, polarization, and systems of violence, as well as to imagine and initiate transformative peace building via community-led change. Our university is located in Kitchener-Waterloo, and it's also where I and many of the panel members currently call home or visit on a regular basis. Therefore, I'd like to acknowledge with humility and respect that my home and workplace are located on the Haldimand Tract, which is the land unequivocally promised to the Six Nations for their allegiance with the British during the American War of Independence. The land promised to them includes 6 miles on each side of the Grand River and consisted of approximately 950,000 acres or 385,000 hectares. Unfortunately, Six Nations lands comprise of less than 5% of what was originally promised to them now. My active work towards reconciliation includes learning about this history, actively listening to the stories from the neutral Anishinaabe and Haudenosaunee peoples, and finding ways that I can embody reconciliation as a settler. If you're interested in learning more about Six Nations, I'd encourage you to check out the links that Madeline will be dropping into the chat. And if you can, spend some time with Phil Montour's work. We'd also encourage you to research the First Nations on the lands that you live and work on. So over the course of our studies, we've come to learn that peace is everyone's business, and there are people and groups who are working towards peace, even though they aren't always acknowledged as peace builders. Last fall, we explored this topic in our Building Civil Societies class, and we had the opportunity to share our findings with one another, and it sparked a lot of really interesting conversations, and we broadened our horizons. So we wanted to share some of those examples with you today as you're thinking about peace and justice and its intersections. Now that you know a little bit about us, we'd like to begin asking you who works for peace. If you have a piece of paper and pen beside you, we'd invite you to write down an individual or group that comes to mind, or simply just make a mental note, whatever works best for you. And later, we're going to loop back to your answers in the presentation and discuss them. Again, that question was, who works for peace? In grappling with this question, we have come to learn that often when people think of peace builders, they think of large national or international organizations and nonprofits or well-known individuals. However, outside of these official channels and high-profile individuals, there are many people, organizations, associations, and projects that are under-recognized for their contributions to peace building and creating social change. For example, people who work at safe injection sites or satanic groups, human libraries, medical histories, Rojava revolutionaries, and even music festivals. We are going to hear about all these examples today, and we're going to begin with Brandon. So Brandon, take it away.
Thank you. Hi, everyone. So I decided to look at religious outliers and the power of radicals. My own background includes work with religious institutions, and I was interested in looking at how other groups also approach peace building. So religious institutions have long been involved in social activism and peace building efforts. These groups are behind many of the social programs which we may take for granted, such as the Red Cross, social work, or care for people with disabilities. These programs were often created from grassroots movements which pushed for systematic change onto larger institutions. Today, grassroots movements from religious outliers continue to lead the way in creating progressive change, and as in the past, they aren't waiting to act. Many religious institutions are associated with a larger body which provides support, resources, and oversight. While this existing infrastructure can be helpful, it may also create barriers, especially in terms of inclusivity and ability to change course quickly and easily. For smaller independent organizations, accountability is a function of the relationship in the community. There's more freedom to act autonomously and prioritize what is most important and relevant to their community. Religious outliers often have a special ability to embrace chaos. By nature, outliers are situated away from the methods, paradigms, and ways of beings of the mainstream. They have already been chosen chaos to some extent by choosing to act outside of the existing systems of peace building, which means they also aren't beholden to limitations imposed by protecting the image or interests of a larger organization. So an example of this is the work being done by the Satanic Temple based out of Salem, Massachusetts. The Satanic Temple is currently waging a legal battle against the state of Texas over newly implemented abortion laws. They argue that the new laws go against the right to religious freedom, specifically the right to bodily autonomy and acting in accordance with best scientific evidence. At face value, this may seem like a publicity stunt, but in fact, the Satanic Temple has been consistently involved in advocacy campaigns in support of education, mental health, healthcare access, addiction support, and other forms of community organization for some time. They use existing laws of religious protection as rationale for progressive social change and peace building. And thankfully, they aren't alone in this, as there are a growing number of religious outliers who are engaged in peace building as a means of practicing their deeply held beliefs. Another example is the Simple Way, which was started in 1988 and based in Philadelphia. It's an intentional community and nonprofit. They're engaged in community development, food distribution, emergency services, as well as being justice initiatives to end the death penalty, border patrol, and citizen disarmament. They're inspired by religious beliefs, but those beliefs are motivational, not a barrier to participation. In fact, both the Simple Way and the Satanic Temple aren't concerned so much with membership or alignment of spiritual beliefs as they are with participation. All are welcome to join in their work and benefit from the efforts. Adrienne Marie Brown, in her book Emergent Strategy, also speaks about the inevitability of chaos within change and the power of small interactions. She suggests that change has a fractal nature, meaning that our actions and ways of being at a small scale will continue to grow outward. For religious outliers, this means that there's an opportunity to adopt strategies and practices that are countercultural or that would be difficult to adapt into existing structures. This is demonstrated very well by the Simple Way, which takes radical approaches to what it means to live in a community. For them, it means taking a literal interpretation of the early Christian church as described in the book of Acts. From the outside, it might appear as a commune or even a cult, but on a closer look, they're showing a different kind of way to live, which is grounded in care and support of each other, as well as their neighbor. By living out their convictions in this very tangible way day to day, they represent the possibility of existing in our world in a different way. The community has grown, but has also inspired others to create intentional communities of their own. This is another benefit of outliers. There's little need for centralized control. Movements can grow, adapt based on the context and needs of the community. Religious outliers are making a strong impact in their communities and are also using their size and freedom to act in their advantage. They're successfully challenging dangerous norms and injustices in our society at large, as well as within the larger religious communities that observe them. By supporting grassroots movements that exist on the fringe, we can be an active participant in creating lasting change. And I will pass it on to our next speaker.
Thank you. Okay, I'm Madeline, and I'm going to talk about the process of harm reduction through safe injection sites and how it builds peace with everyone in a community, not just people who use drugs, because it expands our idea of what it means to support those with addictions. So depending on the community or region that you're in, drug use is handled in a variety of ways. People are often condemned for using drugs. They're also ignored and ostracized in their communities. Neglect and exclusion are forms of violence that people who use drugs experience a lot. So how can we build a community? We can do this by emphasizing inclusion. We can counteract sources of discrimination. So I want you to consider whether your education has created barriers between you and folks who have drug addictions, what you've learned, what kinds of ideas and stories you have about people who use drugs. What is harm reduction? It's a set of practical strategies and ideas aimed at reducing negative consequences associated with drug use. It's a movement for social justice that's built on the belief in and respect for the rights of people who use drugs. It can look like safe injection sites or decriminalizing drug use. And if you're not familiar with safe injection sites, it's a space where people can use substances under medical supervision and support. Needle exchanges, family care, educational programs, and a wide variety of support systems can also be housed at safe injection sites or around them. It's important to ask ourselves what our communities would look like if we had authentic connections with folks who utilized harm reduction services. When we reduce stigma and shame surrounding an activity or behavior, we're able to create relationships built on acceptance and trust. And harm reduction strengthens those severed community threads that many folks who use drugs experience. They create a safer container to engage in a behavior that's criminalized or stigmatized. They meet people where they're at. They accept those people for who they are, and they're not trying to change that behavior, which is a radical act in and of itself. It doesn't happen a lot for people who are using drugs. It changes the consciousness in our society that drug use isn't criminal. And it allows us to look at drug use as a way that someone copes with the trauma in their life. And hidden peace builders often have to fight for what's right, even if they don't have absolute government or community support. An example in Saskatoon, Saskatchewan, Canada, because everyone could be from anywhere here, is a space called Prairie Harm Reduction, and they are exclusively funded by donation and fundraising efforts. The government doesn't fund them, the community does. And it's important to note that Saskatchewan leads the country, leads Canada in HIV cases per capita, and that's primarily pass-through injection drug use. So these sites have practical applications for supporting community health and well-being. So what changes need to be made in order to make harm reduction approaches more prevalent in our society? Margaret Wheatley, who talks about chaos and complexity, explains that we need to start observing the change, that change is a process that we're capable of, and that perhaps we even know how to handle if we clear away the debris of 20th century thinking. And that thinking is that we're machines and that we're robotic and that we can go, 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 go. And we're not that. We're not machines. We're complex people. And as a species, we're really complex. And the idea that people who use drugs are individually at fault, they need to stop their drug use immediately in order to be accepted, those thoughts need to be laid to rest. Can we handle that people who use drugs may need to go to rehab, or they may take the harm reduction approach, or they may seek out some other alternative? Can we allow for complexity to exist in this aspect of our community? Can we challenge our beliefs and shift the paradigm of how society deals with drug use overall? Communities can be judged by how they treat the most vulnerable. And harm reduction practices of inclusion, of meeting people's needs, meeting them where they're at, of cultivating meaningful connection, and of caring for marginalized groups, all contribute to peace and social change. So I hope you thought a little bit differently about safe injection sites and people who use drugs after this presentation. And I will hand it to Allie. Thanks.
Thank you. So I'm Allie, and I'm certainly grateful to be here with everybody. When I was preparing for this event, a captivating thought kind of came across my mind that everyone that's here is being written into all of our life stories. And everyone here has an ongoing story being written as we live our lives and the events unfold. And what holds great power is the opportunity to share our stories and use it to shape our particular narratives in how we understand our worlds. And we all recognize this power as valuable because we're all here at this conference, and our keynote speakers, this panel, and everyone involved is all about sharing particular stories and making you all aware about important narratives through meaningful platform, which is the Notre Dame Peace Conference and what they've offered us. And storytelling can reinstill humanness. And because of this great power, oftentimes important stories that can change our worlds are overlooked, oppressed, or silenced, purposefully. And what's required and often missing from a story that needs to be heard is a platform to share one's story. So two under-recognized groups or hidden peace builders that work towards offering a platform for individuals to tell their stories are the Human Library Organization and Medical Herstory. So first I'll discuss Medical Herstory. They're a youth-led international not-for-profit organization that works to advance gender health equity through providing a platform for storytelling, amongst many other of their foci. They work towards peace by offering public online platform and space at their annual Feminist Health Research Conference that works to eliminate sexism, shame, and stigma from experiences and health experiences, by empowering women and non-binary folks to speak shamelessly about their bodies and their health. And these visible stories reach and educate different medical professionals, they inform the public, and they create a sense of community through storytelling. So what I learned from their work is that storytelling can be used as a method to normalize experiences, raise awareness, and on this specific platform, educate individuals like medical practitioners to learn more about incorporating inclusive practices, accessibility, and compassionate care. Another major element that I learned from their work is that empowerment is not achieved only through providing a platform to share one story, but through the process of giving the storyteller full reign of writing, editing, and sharing their story. This eliminates filters that work to make stories more palatable to certain audiences and instill the storyteller with the capacity to make change with their authentic story. And next is the Human Library Organization, which is a registered international not-for-profit learning platform. They work towards peace through education, creating safe spaces for dialogue to take place virtually and in person. And this happens across social, religious, and ethnic divisions, where individuals themselves are human books and share their personal experiences with the listener in hopes to challenge prejudice and contest discrimination and develop some human connection. These types of spaces create a place where difficult questions can be asked and then genuine conversations can take place. There's one major lesson that I learned from their work, and this lesson is that we need to recognize that there are important measures that need to be taken to develop a platform and a process where individuals are safe to be vulnerable, sharing their stories about their lifestyles, their diagnoses, their beliefs and disabilities, whatever it may be, to ensure that their story is properly heard, but also that they don't experience further prejudice, stigmatization, and discrimination. So Medical Herstory and the Human Library Organization show that it's more than storytelling that works towards peace, but the process of creating a safe and empowering platform to allow individuals to share their stories. So I appreciate your attention, and I will pass things off next to Chantal.
Thanks, Allie. I feel like before I give my part of the presentation, I just want to say that I feel I read your blog posts back in fall term, but I feel like I'm still learning new things from each of you, and I'm like frantically writing down. So yeah, it's super exciting to hear your takes on these hidden peace builder groups again. So thanks again, Allie, for passing it off to me. I'm going to switch gears now and talk about music festivals. And before I tell you about music festivals, I'm going to kind of tell you how I got to writing about music festivals. So if you'll indulge me, that would be wonderful. And I'll take you back to last summer when I went for a massage of all things, and my masseuse asked me how was school going, and I told her about a paper I was writing about short-term utopias and how they can be essential spaces away from society that help people envision what a better, more inclusive world could look like and feel like to them. And so I told her about the example from my own life where I volunteered with Camp 10 Oaks, which is a sleepaway camp for 2S LGBTQ+ children and youth, as well as kids whose parents and guardians identify in those communities. And so when I was volunteering, I witnessed the campers' personal transformations during that week, and then how they go home and carry those discoveries and interactions into their everyday life to create real, tangible change, not only in their communities, but then on a larger, sometimes countrywide scale, which was really cool. And Trisha thought that was very interesting and shared with me that she too had experienced the transformative nature of short-term utopias by participating in a local music festival called Hillside in Guelph, Ontario. And that space that helped her find a community of people that wanted to work towards reconciling their relationship with the land, but then also each other, and how music helped to unite them in that effort. So when I was in fall term, so a couple of months later, and our professor had asked us to think about under-recognized actors in the peace building space, that interaction with Trish kind of was top of mind. And so I decided to look into the ways that music festivals can be ripe locations for peace building and explore what Trish had purportedly said. And so 3 things stood out, and which I think that many of you will already be able to identify, but I think that they're worth repeating. So 3 key reasons music festivals are ripe locations for peace building are: the first, music has the capacity to raise social consciousness. There are many genres of music, such as folk and rap, that are rooted in struggle and protest, and there are many artists that continue using the medium and their platform in this way. This is America by Childish Gambino and a Canadian musician, Bappi St. Marie, and her song Universal Soldier are 2 very effective examples from different decades and different genres that illustrate this point. These artists prove how music is a powerful tool to speak truth to power, advocate for social justice, and empower others to a greater level of awareness and then even action. And then the second thing that I want to raise is that music festivals make space for participants to practice their listening, which I think we can all probably do more of in our day-to-day lives. So the intention of going to a festival is to listen. Festival goers make time and space in their lives to explore something new, feel the music in their bodies by dancing, which I know Madeline will love, be immersed in the crowd, and of course, have a good time. This positions a festival as a unique peace building space, a place where many people will be open to new experiences and learning from others. And then the third thing is that music festivals offer space for participation. So although the primary activity is to listen to music, many offer workshops to learn new skills and participate in social justice organizing. So I'm going to tell you about a little bit of how Hillside does this. So, and also why Hillside is just a brilliant example of being a peace building space. So at Hillside, peacemaking is infused throughout the festival weekend, and this work has been recognized with multiple awards celebrating their positive community impact as well as their environmental leadership. In a conversation I had with the festival director, Marie Zimmerman, I learned 3 intentional ways that they do build peace. The first is they practice intentional inclusion. And so what that means is the music lineup is structured for people to discover new artists as well as new communities. For example, younger and older artists are scheduled back to back to create intergenerational overlap so that younger and older people can get to know one another and have a shared experience. In this way, they're striving to build compassion and empathy across community divides. So in this case, ageism. The second is that they make space for skill sharing and community building. So the workshops at the festivals offer participants the ability to learn new skills, build their networks, share resources, and find out and get involved with new social justice movements. Program highlights include workshops that focus on active living, environmentally focused do-it-yourself opportunities, Indigenous circles, and much more. And so in this way, this is an important way that Hillside builds local capacity. And then the final thing is that they actually train their volunteers in peacemaking strategies. Hillside volunteers are trained in basic conflict and crisis resolution training before their shift begins at the festival. And the intention is to equip them with the necessary tools to de-escalate situations at the festival as they arise. But beyond their volunteer role, they're able to take these skills into their home lives and their work lives to have that greater impact on and have a better ability to be more peaceful as they go into their communities. But you might be sitting there thinking, oh, that's great for Hillside, but what about all the rest of the festivals? And that's very fair. Not all festivals are the same. That's true. While some are clear notes of opposition to capitalist consumer culture like Hillside, and they promote peace, there are other big commercial festivals that seem like they're binges on individualistic hedonism. But I don't think that we can just strictly categorize festivals in these stark terms. They are not either nonprofit peace builders or consumer culture attractions. Rather, each festival possesses the capacity to be both, and it's up to us to see the opportunities for improvement and reinvention. And this can happen by broadening how we approach peace building. It can happen by developing strategic partnerships across civil society organizations. And finally, valuing the spaces we occupy as the first place to practice peace, which I think my fellow panelists have also been saying. In Emergent Strategy, the scholar Adrienne Marie Brown shows us that by valuing the spaces that we occupy as the front line, a first place we can practice peace, justice, liberation, and alignment with each other and the planet, we can begin to see change. In essence, instances of peacemaking over a festival weekend can give us a taste for what a better world can be like and have a lasting effect that can reverberate into our daily lives. This is what Brown says the fractal nature of change, and what we practice at the small scale sets the patterns for the whole system. On that final, very optimistic note, who's ready to buy their next festival ticket? I am. I'm actually going to a festival tonight. We were talking about that before we came online with all of you. And I'm very excited to see Lord. But before that, I'll pass it off to Rebaz.
Thanks, Chantal. I'll be looking at that festival in the summer differently when I attend for the first time. I'll be going with both enjoying the music and trying to learn something about peace. I'll be taking you to a different locale and a different theme in my presentation. I'll be taking you out of North America all the way to the Middle East, and particularly to the northeastern corner of Syria, where it's by the people there called Rojava, but otherwise it's called the Autonomous Administration. So in 2014, when the fight with ISIS was happening in Syria, BBC put out this questionnaire on their website asking, who is the angel of Kobane? And under the question was a picture of a beautiful Kurdish girl wearing army fatigue, holding a peace sign in one hand and an AK-47 in the other hand. And behind her, a number of men were standing. So within few months, Rojava's angels or Kobane's angel went viral when Western media started using it to refer to the all-female women protection units, or YPJ, who were fighting to liberate Kobane, a city in Rojava, from the ISIS insurgency. By December 2014, CNN dubbed the YPJ fighters, the women fighters, the most inspiring women of the year. So international media latched onto this image of the heroism of young female leftist fighters fighting Islamic extremism, barbarians, and juxtaposed these two pictures and hailed the female fighters as the heroes, which was true. But then it begged the question: what about the ones who are running the day-to-day life in Rojava? Obviously, not everyone is a fighter. Obviously, not everyone is familiar with an AK-47. So the question to me became, what about the other women? What do they do there? So Syria, northwestern Syria particularly, is a region with a lot of divides because you have a ton of different religious, ethnic, and sectarian minorities, such as Kurds, Arabs, Turkmen, Sunnis, Shi'i, Christian, Yazidis, Druze, etc., etc. So how would you hold peace in a community like that, where the smallest act of transgression between two individuals might be interpreted as an act of intercommunal hatred, and might spark conflict in the community? So the way to do that in Rojava is through a unit or a group called the House of Women. House of Women is an elected council. Each council is elected on basis of a commune, and each commune is made of up to 150 families. So these houses of women, which are sometimes called the grandma's house because they're usually and end up being older women, most of them illiterate. They're elected by the community to do a number of things. First of all, they're responsible for protecting women, helping them participate in local politics, helping them get set up economically, and most importantly, they settle local conflicts, these local women councils. So when a conflict takes place in a community so fragile and so fractured along ethno-sectarian lines, it is important to be put down before it becomes a bigger matter and resolved within the community. So the way they do that is through a restorative justice approach that is based on the local traditions. According to local traditions in Syria and in the Middle East, when somebody does transgress against someone else, it's not just the other person who get hurt, it's the whole community. So even if the law intervenes and holds the transgressor accountable, the community still needs to heal. That's a separate process. So that's how it's done. Is usually they involve the families of both the victims and the perpetrators and everyone else in the community, because a crime or a bad act is a transgression against everyone. So by doing that, these women project a different interpretation of feminism. Feminism through local traditions, feminism through local values, and feminism through local relationship building. What these communities do is build relationship on the ground level. So conflict stays and get solved on the ground level and not develop into a larger community-wide or commune-wide level. So I wanted to highlight the role of these women, these grandmas, and celebrated in addition to the role of the female fighters, because I believe that their role is not less important in keeping the peace in the area, especially after the defeat of ISIS. And the hardest part that usually comes after conflict violence is reconstructing the community itself. And with that, I'll pass it back to Chantal.
Fantastic. Look at that. We are ready to interact with you, our participants. Hi, everybody again. We're going to loop back to that activity. So you've heard from us now about the groups we recognize as peace builders. And we'd love to hear now from you in the chat, if you wouldn't mind putting in your answers to our question. Who do you think works for peace that is under-recognized? That'd be fantastic. And we would also love to answer some of your questions that may have popped up when we were speaking about our research. So if you have questions for us, we'd also love to hear from you. And Ali's going to be taking a look at the chat for your answers. And maybe you can raise your hand or just unmute yourself, Ali, when you see some answers pop in, and you can jump in. But in the meantime, perhaps we can tackle a few questions that we had identified that we know that we would love to talk about. So yeah, let's start with this one. What are some of the anticipated challenges in replicating the approach that you talked about? I can share first if you'd like to get things warmed up. So one of the things so like I had mentioned, I had interviewed with Marie Zimmerman about Hillside Festival, and she's the current director. And I had asked her at that point, like, do other people do festivals the way you do it? And she's like, yes, there is like a body, a group that comes together of executive directors of festivals in Ontario to discuss best practices. And she said, like we share what we do and they share what they do. And, there's a lot of really good knowledge sharing that happens. But at the end of the day, it's up to the individual's responsibility to enact those changes, right? So it does come down to having that individual appetite. So really, I think that underscores the fractal nature of change, of like, you yourself have to really decide that this is worthwhile and go forward and advocate for it in your own settings. So I think that's one of the biggest barriers to replicating an approach in at least that space of festivals. Yeah, so what about the rest of you? Maybe I can pick on Brandon or Madeline or Rebaz. Anybody? Allie?
I'm happy to go.
Sure, yeah.
Yeah, so when I was thinking about different anticipated challenges and replicating the approach, I actually came up with quite a lot.
Oh.
And it's just all the different angles that there are. So thinking about intention and just that alone, that the intention behind developing a platform to show a story may not prompt stories to work to combat prejudice and stereotypes. And as we may know, like stories can also be told to perpetuate prejudice and stereotypes. So a challenge could be the intention behind why the platform's being created, as well as the accessibility. So the two that I spoke about have online platforms, and this isn't available to everyone. And it's not accessible to everyone in the sense that they might not have the internet, as well as that they might have different accessibility issues that they need to that may not allow them to access the different stories online. And then I was thinking about the fact of the editing and filtering piece and who is offering the platform and who's editing these stories, because the stories can be altered in ways that may fit a particular narrative, but changes the message of the original story. And lastly, that volunteer piece. So what stands out for me is all of these platforms are voluntary based, and that means that these stories are being offered by someone who feels they're prepared to share their story. And there are circumstances where someone or a group may experience or fear for their lives if they were to share their stories. So leaving them unable to volunteer and contribute to combating the oppressive narratives that may be silencing them. So there's a few difficult pieces that are challenging pieces that maybe come into play when trying to replicate these types of platforms.
I can speak to it a little bit as well. Speaking about religious outliers, I think one of the biggest challenges, obstacles, is just how much work it is. It's so much easier to use infrastructure that's already there, even if it's, maybe not helping in the way that you want it to, or it's going in a different direction. It's so much easier to use what's already there. And so I think with something like Simple Way, they've been around for so long and they developed very, very slowly and starting in a very small capacity, and then have grown over the decades. And it's hard when you have a vision or something you want to accomplish, you want to be able to get right in there. So I think there's a lot of patience involved, and a lot of things that have to be, maybe things that would be given in other institutions that you have to like figure out from the ground up as a process. So that'd be one of the main things I would think of.
I can also say a little bit about anticipated challenges. So the main issue with culturally based peace practices is that it is culturally based, which means it evolves over time, which means the further the generations get away from the culture and the culture gets entangled with, or let's just say gets lost in the modern day globalist culture, people tend to not forget necessarily, but tend to see these old practices as relics and not as life tools. It will be seen as it's a quaint thing that our ancestors used to do and not something that we can still do. And so that the challenge is destigmatizing cultural traditions and seeing them as valid as any other modern practices, and also remembering that like nothing we practice now is exactly as it was before. Like cultures do shift and develop and change over time, and each generation adds to it. And if adding to an old tradition, if adding to it would be okay, how to do this reconciliation circle through Zoom. That's a new thing you added to the culture. So the challenge is, I guess, educating the current and new generation that there's nothing to be ashamed about, heritage, as long as it serves, as long as it serves peace, as long as it serves, equity and justice. All cultures are valid, and there's no reason for throwing everything just for the sake of being seen as modern and quote unquote hip, I guess.
Thanks, Rebaz. I just wanted the comment in the chat by Anne was awesome, that recognizing parents and caregivers as peace builders. I wish we had better language to recognize the work and value of parenting. I agree. I'm just going to speak to some of the challenges of safe injection sites and not take up so much time because there's so many challenges. Wow, where to begin? Okay, so first, I mean, the ideology and the belief system that people have around drug use, long way to go. Like, we have a lot of NIMBYism going on, right? Not in my backyard. We don't want people to die. We don't want people to overdose. We don't want people to have bloodborne illnesses, HIV, but we don't want to have safe injection sites. So there's a lot of cognitive dissonance that happens, a lot of fear surrounding people in that community. Again, we aren't very strong at reaching out and making connections with people that are different than us, especially when they're when they have a behavior that we think is inherently bad or wrong or is their fault. And so I think there's a lot of mental hurdles that need to be overcome. And then secondly, every community is different. So we can't just say, okay, every community that has a drug problem needs a safe injection site. Maybe they need something else, right? Like, it really has to be context specific. This is this Western model. There's many other ways to deal with people that have trauma and have drug issues. So I think that's another challenge too, is like not just taking this one way of being and going, okay, we need to do this everywhere, but really making sure that it's community, context, culturally specific as well.
I love, there were so many points where the four of you were talking where I was like, oh, I want to learn more about that. Like Ali, when you were speaking about whose voices get heard and what are the barriers to, for some voices not to be heard. Yeah, I think that is such an important point. I have a friend that is a journalist, and she is currently writing a book on Muslim women's experiences of sexuality and the barriers they face in being able to be sexual beings in this world. And there was a lot of points during that research that she felt like she might have to not publish the book at all because it threatened the participants' lives. And so, like, I think that that story relates to the kinds of research that you've been doing, but certainly I think that those kinds of barriers of like where you are at in your personal journey really does dictate if you're sharing your story or not. So like I was, thinking about that, and certainly for the Brandon, Madeline, and Rebaz's responses, lots of thoughts happening in my brain over here. But I will move on to the next question that we had kind of thought about, which is positionality and that power to enact these spaces of peace building. And so I'm wondering about how it relates to how we can use our positionality to do or not do peace work. And in your examples, how have the positionality of those peace builders in that work worked for or against the work that they're doing, if that makes sense, or if I'm rambling, let me know. Let's go backwards. Madeline, can I pick on you?
I gotta talk again, and I just thought.
Let's go backwards. Let's do a little Madeline, Rebaz, Brandon, Ellie, and then me, back to me, if that works.
Can you rephrase the question?
I can
know
totally
that word,
rephrase the question.
I
I
got
think,
it turned around.
yeah, so I'm curious about positionality. So how does someone in the safe injection site space as a peace builder, how does their own positionality work to help do this kind of peace building work, or has their positionality work against them? So an example, so I can, how about I go first? I do have an example from Hillside Festival. So I do think that Hillside Festival falls into both categories. So a lot of people think of Hillside as like a hippie kind of space. And so that actually works against them sometimes, insofar that they have a lot of really fantastic practices when it comes to social justice work with humanity, but then also in terms of sustainability. And they have become one of the most carbon neutral festival spaces in North America. But yet, because they're kind of seen in this spotlight of being a hippie kind of festival, other festivals don't necessarily take them as seriously for those practices, right? So that's a way in which their positionality sometimes works against them. On the other flip side, I'd say that being a hippie festival gives them power to experiment and to try new things. So they are very well known for being a festival that is always innovating. One year, I think it was back in 2018, they experimented with powering their stages with bicycles. And so volunteers as well as participants could sign up to come on a bike and pedal to make sure the stage had enough energy so that the musicians on the stage could perform. So like that was one thing that they tried, right? And they tried a number of different things throughout the years to make the space more sustainable. And that's just one example, but a part of being that hippie festival gives them that power to experiment with new things, and their audience is more willing to indulge them in that, if you would like to think of it that way. So that's one way that positionality works for or against, I think, Hillside Festival. So maybe hopefully that helps to kind of you envision how I'm thinking of this question. How does power work for or against your situations?
Yeah, that makes sense. I'll go for it. I just love the vision of people riding a bicycle. Could you see them? Like,
I know, right? Yeah. And one of their stages, they have like one of their stages is a green space. So like they actually have a garden on top of the green of one of the festival stages, like their main stage. It's wild. It's pretty cool.
Gotta go. Yeah, it sounds magical. I think part of the harm reduction approach is that people who utilize those services are part of the decision-making process. So they have this community-based approach. They're literally going to the community. People who work there and are surrounded in these initiatives are constantly looking at the community and saying, like, what can we do? How can we help you? What do we need? Instead of like a top-down approach, saying like, oh, this is what we should do, and not consulting people. And so I think that's a real strength of it, because it's serving the people who actually need these services. And in part of the blog post, I was relating a story that my friend who helped initiate prey harm reduction, she was working with a lot of people who were in this demographic. And one woman came up to her when she found out they were going to implement a safe injection site finally in Saskatoon. She said, "Hey, thanks for thinking of us." And just really simple, but this really profound acknowledgement that not a lot of people are thinking about this group. So I feel like the positionality of just looking towards those folks and actually giving them a voice is very powerful. But then on the flip side, people that have power that could fund these places and really help these folks are not engaging in these spaces, and they aren't creating these meaningful connections that could really save a lot of lives and really build communities. So there's a lot of severed threads still here, where there's still a lot of us and them in that positionality. So that's a weakness. And I think a lot of people still avoid like the areas that safe injection sites are. They don't want to go near those spaces. I think they're really dangerous, those types of things. Really just stop stop these relationships from being built and these initiatives from going further and helping people ultimately. Like that's what they're supposed to be. So I'll stop there.
Yeah, for me, the main challenge that I believe these particular women face in relation to their positionality is it's not enough to be elected to be on this council. You could get the vote, but do you really have the trust and ear of the people? Because so much of their work is based on relationship building and people trusting in your judgment. And when you mix that, traditionally, there were no elections. People would just go to the elders, but this is a new form of more organized elder circle. So when you add elections, then you have politics in the mix, and some people might get elected to this council, but they might not have the relationship base that they need for the people to hear them and see them as elders, and that might actually jeopardize the work that they do. I don't have examples of that happening because people usually tend not to elect people who they don't trust in their judgment. But it's a thing that definitely could happen, because when you have elections, even though the positions are completely voluntary and no financial gains whatsoever, but it is a position of power. And when you have that and you mix election in the mix, you don't know what kind of results you get. So it's not always guaranteed that these women councils are always compromised of people that they have, established trust and respect in the community, if that makes sense.
Yeah, talking about positionality and power is always an interesting start. I think there's a lot there. When I think about the simple way out of Philadelphia, I think in a lot of ways they have given up power and positionality. So for instance, one of the founders, I believe, was educated at Harvard, had a lot of really good initial opportunities to be out in the world. He's an accomplished author, but really has given up most of that power in order to put it back into the community. And I think that's like a really powerful thing to do. So has a lot of notoriety that way because he's chosen to live a certain way and has really followed through with it for so long. Satanic Temple, they also have a really interesting approach, I think, just because they are attracting people who don't necessarily want to be involved with traditional religious institutions. And so you have a lot of experts. You have scientists and engineers and doctors and a ton of lawyers. And these are all people who use their skills and use their power in really effective ways. And yeah, I think it's also like it's a different approach, but a very well-utilized one.
Thanks, Brandon. Yeah, so when I think about specifically medical herstory, the CEO, Tori Ford, based the entire organization off of her own story. So her positionality, or being open and honest with her experiences regarding her health and experiences in the medical system, allowed others to learn from her and inspired the creation of medical herstory. So they were able to create this platform to show people's stories and feature them, but also work to make change within the medical system. And this shared power with the volunteers too, to carry this message and create change. And I think her vulnerability was her power to create a new narrative. It wrote a narrative that combated the silent patient narrative, where the medical practitioner knows best, and kind of showed that as a patient, you can speak out and make change.
Super. Well, thanks for sharing about that topic. And I was wondering, Allie, has anybody shared with you what their answers were to the question, who works for peace? Maybe not.
Just the one that Madeline mentioned. So
Oh, just the one that
parents and
Madeline mentioned.
caregivers, which is still an excellent answer that we could feature
Fantastic.
again.
Awesome. Cool. If I can, I'd like to pick on Rebaz a little bit, because when you were talking about how the grandmothers, like when you're being elected into politics, like it's not something like you need to have that social capital and like that trust. I wanted to say that I ended up listening to the podcast that you recommended based on the Rojava revolutionaries. And I thought it was really interesting how the journalists for that podcast really try to tease out with people whether or not they did buy into this new social order, and if they did trust the women that they were willing to give up their power and their positionality to let the women lead in these new ways. And a lot of people did say, yes, we are, but there was still some hesitation. So like, it's an interesting dynamic that they have going on over there. I don't remember what the podcast name was, but if you do remember, I think maybe mentioning it for other folks that are interested in your work would be cool, because I really learned a lot from that podcast.
Thanks for bringing that up. I completely forgot about that one. I put it in the chat. It's called Women's War.
Yes.
The host is a conflict journalist who goes to Iraq and Syria and interviews both these kind of regular people on the ground who do the legwork, but also commanders and female fighters and administrators. So different people in different power levels in that structure. And it's unique in that the Rojava administration is mostly run by volunteers and anarchists from all over the world that just go there and share whatever skill they have. It's kind of a unique social experiment that I hope it lasts and see where it goes from there. Yeah, thanks Chantal for reminding me of that one.
My pleasure. It was a good listen. Sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, no, sorry. If there are no more questions for us, I think this is all the time we have for today. So thank you so much for everyone who contributed and participated, and for the committee for the 2022 Notre Dame Student Peace Conference for hosting us. And if you are interested in the topics we presented, Madeline will be adding a PDF of our work to the chat, which I also believe that the host will also have for students to access later, if I'm not mistaken. So with that, thank you very much, and I wish everyone a great day. Take care.
Bye, everybody. Thanks for joining us.